Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of World Cup Cherries. Of course, the 15th episode of Cherry Picking, where we are going to discuss, of course, something that's happening and starting on Sunday, ahead of the big game on Monday at 1 o'clock of all times. So, before we get stuck into it, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. So, I have got my three guests here today. Firstly, Mr. Matthew Harrison. How you doing, mate?
All good, Craig. Looking forward to the World Cup getting kicking off.
Definitely. I have got Mr. Samuel Harrison below me. How you doing, Sam?
All good, mate. How you doing?
Yep, all good. And in the right corner, I have got Manny. How you doing, Manny?
All good, Mr. Beazley. Thank you for having me along. Always a pleasure to come cherry picking and not half a bit of fun.
Yep,
really good.
Definitely. Glad to have you with us again. So, of course, we've discussed the Everton game. We've gone through all that. And it's a weird scenario at this moment in time where we are in a off-season break, which means the World Cup in Qatar. Normally, you know, when the World Cup's on, it's baking hot outside. It's beautiful. You can sit in the beer garden. You can watch the football. You can sit down the beach, then come up and watch the England game. There's none of that this year because if I go and lay on the beach, I'm going to catch a cold. Or get rained on or something else.
It's a case of this year more like put the Christmas decks up and then watch the England game rather than coming off the beach and watch the England game.
Yeah, exactly. And it'd be a bit dark down there as well. So, yeah, won't be able to actually have a decent conversation with anyone. So, it's a unique situation. But here's a question for everybody. I was speaking to Paulo, our Brazilian preview guest, and Brazil's off season, so that their season's just ended. Their season's just ended. Is it a case that maybe this might become a little bit more of the norm where it alternates? And do you think it's fair that we always have the World Cup in the summer, normally June, July, and Brazil have their seasons disrupted to an effect?
That's a very good point. I mean, it's never happened for us before, is it? And
No.
you know, for countries like Brazil, it happens every 4 years, I suppose. I don't know. What's your take on it, Sam, Manny? What's your take on it?
I think it'd just carry on with the majority, doesn't it? It depends how many countries fall into that. If there's more countries that keep it in June, July, they keep it June, July. But if there is equal, then I can't see why not they shouldn't spread it. So then you go 1 on 1, so everyone gets their turn to have it when it's their off season.
What do you reckon, Manny?
I'm actually a believer, gentlemen, in sort of keeping things the way they are. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. And let's
Yeah.
bear in mind that the fact that the World Cup would normally happen in the summer during the peak of Brazil's season has not stopped them from winning it 5 times. So I definitely don't want to see a situation where things are sort of adjusted to suit one continent and leaving the other continents to suffer. And bear in mind, it's not even a question of trying to alternate it, but you can take a look at the European teams and other teams from different continents and how they're about to suffer during this World Cup because of the excessive heat. I'm just grateful, mind you, that it's not being played in the summer when it gets even hotter. And even right now, when technically it should be autumn/winter in Qatar, the temperatures still can get quite hot. Thankfully, in the Middle East, it's not so humid as it would be if you go further down south, like towards the Indian subcontinent or what have you. But still, it's going to be very difficult. And the logistics of having to select venues and to try and fit schedules to suit everyone would just not work. And we're seeing now as well that with the tournament to end 5 days before Christmas, and certainly some Boxing Day games on the agenda in countries like the UK and elsewhere, I just don't know how those teams are going to be able to prepare for it. Whereas back in South America and North America and other countries, for example, they more or less sort of organize their season around it, and as they have done for the last few years. So, in a nutshell, if it isn't broken, just don't fix it.
Yeah. No, see, I do see your point, and to be honest, it doesn't seem like Brazilians have really ever complained about it and that setup before. Of course, we could go on about Qatar and the actual hosting of the World Cup there. I got no problem with it being alternated from continent to continent. That makes perfect sense, but there is a lot of issues that have raised their heads. I was having a look as well, and I believe that both the World Cups in Brazil and also Russia, they spent about 15 billion to host the World Cup. Qatar, 300 billion.
Wow.
300 billion. And you think it's a bit crazy. And of course, it's just been announced today that nobody can have a drink inside the stadiums as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that this afternoon, which is it's funny innit, that they backtrack on it 2 days before the tournament starts. But
it might be quite good. You never know. It might be quite a good thing. And to be fair, I am a great believer that Qatar shouldn't really be accommodating to everybody else's wants.
yeah,
They've got their laws, and we've got to respect that. I think that's the best way to be, really, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. Obviously, when you go to someone else's, another country, and you got to respect that country and that country's laws, traditions. But I think it's quite funny how they've said, that they would do certain things, and now a little bit of a backtrack.
Yeah.
Budweiser aren't happy with it, but
I'm sure they're not. I'm sure.
Far be it from me to again play the devil's advocate, but I'm actually, glad that they did it. I am surprised, like you, that they backtracked. But, in my experience of having been to stadia where alcohol has been served, back in Florida, of course, when I've been to the Raymond James about 3 times, I find that when they serve beer in either those tins or those plastic glasses, a large majority of the people who come to watch the game and have a drink are very, very messy. Yeah. So, I mean, why should the organizers run the risk of some rowdy hooligans, if you will, messing up their stadium and pouring alcohol everywhere, and probably spoiling it for a large number of devout Muslims who might be coming over to the game to enjoy themselves? And I believe in the Netherlands, this sort of segues, if you will, Craig, into that discussion you had with the 2 Dutch journalists. I'm sure they will tell you that supporters throwing beer at players is a bit of a tradition, really. So to have that possibly going on in Qatar, I'm not too sure it would go down well. So they've made the right decision, but I think they will allow alcohol in the fan villages of sorts, where if you want to just go there and have a good time with your mates and watch the game, you could just have sort of a drink and just settle down and just socialize. It shouldn't. I'm certain as well that they won't allow it to become a place where alcohol will be abused as such. So they're treading a fine line with that issue, and they're certainly trying to maintain that balance. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes on during the tournament. But should be interesting, and I think they've done the right thing.
I guess if anybody's very intoxicated over there and does something stupid, the punishments are going to be very, very heavy. So it is definitely not worth their while, so to speak.
Can I just go back to the actual financial side of it? And I when I hear how much money like Brazil spent on all these stadiums, and now they're just overgrown, unused stadiums, and I think, how on earth has this country not had a World Cup since '66? I mean, we've got the infrastructure there. I think the Euros pretty much proved that. We wouldn't need to build any new stadia, nothing like that. We could host a World Cup at a drop of a hat, and I just think it's we've got the best league in the world, some of the best stadia in the world, and we've not had a World Cup since 1966.
But none of them are going to go to waste as well. There is talk about the joint bid with Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland, which actually I quite like that idea. That it's not just consigned to the one country, but we could just host it. I know that there's some quite big omissions. I know that Arsenal Stadium hasn't been selected for Euro 2028 if it's awarded. I know Spurs is. Everton's is the new one.
Oh, of course,
yeah. Yeah. There's some surprising one. Old Trafford. Now that's a weird one for me, because personally, Old Trafford does need a lot of work done to it, whereas the Emirates is ready.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think I speak with a lot of Arsenal fans, and they can also tell me that they go to the Emirates Stadium quite often. And they can also tell me that although maybe not on the scale of Old Trafford, even some parts of that stadium are in need of repair as well. And it is strange, though. You're right, Craig. I mean, I'm a bit surprised as to why they would, gloss over the Emirates as such. I think maybe it could have something to do with the fact that the other stadia in question might have hosted tournament football in the past, whereas the Emirates Stadium is a little bit of a new child on the block and hasn't really hosted much international football. Of course, they've hosted a lot of European games, but then that and international tournament football are chalk and cheese. So, I mean, that might be one reason why. And I think obviously there should be a lot of work done with the Emirates as well. Maybe in future tournaments it could be considered. And I do seem to remember that in 2008, Scotland and Ireland did have a joint bid to host the Euros, but that year it went to Austria and Switzerland. And of course, 4 years later, we had the Ukraine and Poland hosting it. So as you said, the idea of joint bids is really good. And I actually would like to see that being more between Scotland, Ireland and Wales, because those are countries which between them can provide some really good stadia, some wonderful surroundings. There's a lot of history to the game as well. And yesterday I was doing a watch along with Del Boy Gunner for the Ireland game, Ireland versus Norway. And we were talking about the prospect of a joint bid and trying to bring football through to parts of the country where it would be needed. The only problem is in Ireland, football isn't that big compared to the Gaelic sports. And in Scotland, it may be reasonably big, but then, the distance between the stadium might be a bit of an issue. But certainly logistics can be thought out. And I think those bids would be good. And of course, when it comes to England, well, I think we also saw in the Euro final that hooliganism still rears its ugly head. So the sight of those people, rushing into Wembley and causing an absolute, creating a nuisance, is something that still lingers on the minds of so many people who just think that for all of the time that's gone since, the 80s and the 90s when it was at its peak, we still haven't quite, reformed. So there's always going to be that, that black mark against us. So until we can really show some commitment to getting rid of that, it might be a long time before we get to host a World Cup, and we might have to put up with, doing the Euros. But I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully, the years will go by. We might just get a chance. We actually, I think, we had a bid to host in 2018, but that went to Russia. So it will take some time, but I'm hopeful.
I do like the historic grounds at World Cups as well, and I think that's something that we've missed for so long. Do a little bit of work to them, but for example, Everton's new stadium. I could understand Spurs' stadium in there, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, but Everton's new stadium will have no history. Goodison has, but it's a completely new build, and that's why I think. Really, I think there could have been better picks around the country. Should Old Trafford host one games? Well, it's still one of the biggest, but like we say, it's got quite worn down recently, and therefore, probably Villa Park's another one that's also been mentioned. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But I think it'll be nice eventually to host a World Cup, because we are ready. The infrastructure's ready. We don't need to build whole new stadiums. We don't need to splash out so much money, and these stadiums aren't going to go to waste after the tournament because teams will still be playing in them. So, that's my view on it. But of course, we've got this World Cup coming up. Our first game is against Iran on Monday. Does anybody know much about the Iranian team?
Obviously, I could say that they're sort of like an Iranian powerhouse. I think they were quite big in the 90s and the early 2000s, but they sort of faded away a little bit. And I think they're making a comeback to the big stage after a gap of a few years. And obviously, the days of the likes of Ali Daei and a few others are long gone. But they do have a guy named Jahan Bakhsh in their team, who, of course, we will know from having played Premiership football with Brighton and Hove Albion. And of course, they're still coached by, Carlos Queiroz has come back to coach them again. I think he coached them earlier. I think it was in 2006 that we last saw them. And they do have another guy named Saman Ghoddos who plays for Brentford in the English Premiership. So some of our players might have played against him, or they know how he plays. It's also an interesting selection because they've got a couple of guys who play in Qatar in the local league for a club called Al Ahli Doha. So, maybe that's a horses for courses pick, and they certainly know the conditions very well. Blend of youth and experience. And Sarifard, we remember him as well. I believe he also has some Premiership experience, or he's played in England. Yeah, he was with Nottingham Forest for a season. So I wouldn't really expect them to do very much in the group, but they will give teams a tough fight. You underestimate them at your peril. And of course, in 1998, when they were in a group with the US, who were also in our group, I believe they beat them 2-1 or 2-0. I don't quite remember, but they certainly had a fine team playing that day. With this current squad, they can certainly give them the other boys in the group a bit of a fight, but I wouldn't really put it past our boys to beat them. And I think, the others, I think the US right now, especially with the way Greg Berhalter's named the squad, will have a bit too much for them. So I'm not altogether too worried. I'm sure Southgate will tell his boys not to underestimate them. So we should be fine.
I remember they used to have a player called Mehdi Maltakiva, didn't they, as well? Around.
Yeah, Mehdi Medamakia. Yeah, I remember.
You said it a lot better than I did. I've pronounced it wrong on my entire life. But yeah, I remember he used to be quite special.
Yeah, he was a quality player, and certainly another of the bright lights of the Iranian team, along with Ali Dai and a few others. But those days, of course, are gone. And as we know, there's a lot of political upheaval going on in Iran. We're not going to discuss that here. So they're going to be a team of marked men, but they're also going to, have points to prove. And we're not going to take these boys lightly at all. No, sir.
Definitely. Well, let's have a look at our squad. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and pick, the players. Are we going to go for a 4-4-2 formation, or what are we going to play formation-wise? What do you think Southgate will choose?
Might be a 4-3-3.
4-3-3. Shall we get into, because only one of these can play. But let's start off with the goalkeepers. We're not going to play two goalkeepers on the pitch.
No.
So go on, Sam. Matt, you talk us through each of the players.
Well, to be fair, I mean, I don't know whether Sam and Manny will agree, but I would say these are probably the three keepers I would select. Jordan Pickford, obviously, as we know, we watched him last Saturday, and he did cause a little bit of a blunder, didn't he? And
yes,
but he would be in the squad for me purely because of his experience, and he's played at tournaments, so he knows what to expect.
That Colombia penalty shootout was the thing that stood out most for me from Jordan Pickford, and we still do have a terrible record in penalty shootouts, but to be fair, we did well that night, and we was hoping that it might be a little bit of a change in the wind where we could actually start winning penalty shootouts, especially if we come up against somebody like Germany. Of course, haven't come up against Germany in a penalty shootout, beat Germany in normal time. Very, very nice. That hasn't happened for a while in the tournament, but of course we come up against Italy, and I can't really blame the players that took those penalties that day. I think Pickford did again all he could. I can't really blame the players because I think Saka is a young player, and that was huge weight on his shoulders, and I feel so sorry for him in that scenario. So yeah, I gotta say Pickford is very good from the penalty spot, but if a penalty shootout happens, he's one of the one out of the three you'd probably choose. But go on, before I butted in, Matt, you carry on.
That's all right. That's all right. Made a good point, Craig. No worries. Nick Pope has had a strong season for Newcastle. He's played the last couple of England games as well, I believe, hasn't he?
Yes.
A starter. I know Pickford, was he injured or was he just not selected? I can't remember. Don't know if anybody knows.
He was rotating it a little bit, wasn't he?
Was he?
Yeah.
And obviously, thirdly, a man that we all know pretty well, Mr. Aaron Ramsdale, who for me, I think eventually will become England's number one and will be England's number one for quite some time. So,
here's a question though.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't he be England's number one now? Because out of those three goalkeepers, he is playing for the team on the top of the pile. He's done very, very well this season. I think he's an outstanding goalkeeper. He's learned season on season, so any mistakes he'll learn on them. Would it not be better to give him that goalkeeping berth now, like David Seaman did? David Seaman had it fairly young, and then made it his own for how many tournaments was it that David Seaman was in goal for? It felt like a lot more than it probably was.
This is one for Manny.
Yeah, I know that he was the starter in Euro 96, France 98, Euro 2000, and Japan and Korea 2002. So that's 4 tournaments. I also do remember that he was originally picked as the third keeper for the Italia 90 team, but as ill luck would have it, he injured himself and had to be sent home, which meant that Dave Bessett made his. He sort of came back in a little bit like how Dean Henderson had to be sent home through injury, giving Aaron Ramsdale a chance to come into the squad. I only hope that Seaman was able to pick up a medal or some sort of commemorative award after England finished 4th that year, but I don't think he did. And I'd like to actually correct you there because at that time in Italia 90, Peter Shilton was still the #1 goalkeeper, but obviously his international career was winding down, and it was agreed that Italia 90 would be his last tournament. And in addition to David Seaman, there was Chris Woods, who was competing for that goalkeeping slot. He was actually a bit higher in the pecking order, and he in fact would be the first choice for England in Euro 92 when they went to the tournament in Sweden. So I believe Seaman was capped 3 times before Italia 90, and obviously after Shilton retired, it was a question of who out of Woods or Seaman would be the #1, and both of them had some good competition over a few years. I believe it was in Euro 96 that he made it his own because Woods apparently decided to end his career, or maybe he wasn't being considered by Terry Venables or Venables anymore. So he wasn't really that young, and he was 27 when he made his debut for England, and it was, I think, about 29-ish or so when he started to play a little bit more regularly. So he ended his career with England very close to his 39th birthday, I think. So he played for a good 10 years, but he started quite late, and goalkeepers do tend to mature late. And the big problem I have with giving Ramsdale the responsibility right now is that I don't believe that, for example, when he played for England against Hungary, his most recent international at home, I believe it was at Molineux he played, he did not cover himself with glory at all. And ever since then, whenever Pickford and Pope have played, I think Pope has at least done marginally better as a shot stopper, but his distribution in those 2 Nations League games he played wasn't of the best. So in terms of shot stopping, I would say that Pope is probably the best out of the 3, marginally ahead of Pickford. I think Ramsdale has the best distribution out of the 3, but again, not that much better than Pickford. So Pickford might be picked as the better all-round choice. And another reason why I'm against giving that responsibility to someone so young is because it happened with Paul Robinson. Everyone was raving over him in the run-up to the 2006 World Cup, but he didn't have a great tournament despite I think he kept clean sheets in 3 of their 5 games, but against Trinidad and Tobago, he was very nearly caught out for a few balls, certainly from set pieces, and he never recovered after a terrible error in the qualifiers for Euro 2008. So again, if you give someone so young that responsibility and they end up making a few errors, would they be able to recover from that? I'm not too sure. So I think England will continue with Pickford, and Pope and Ramsdale will continue to serve their apprenticeships and compete to be a decent backup. And Pickford has done no wrong, very little wrong, in fact, whenever he's played for England. So this will obviously be a test to see how well he can continue that momentum going into the tournament.
We was discussing this actually, me and the Connor who did the Everton preview, and it feels, and although he did make a point that Pickford has been a lot more stable for Everton over the past couple of seasons, you always think when he's in an England shirt, it's a pair of safe hands. So I can understand actually, and it's some really good points that you make there, Manny, about because my pick would have been Aaron Ramsdale. Throw him into the fold and try and make him make that position his. And of course, he's done fantastically well for Arsenal. But I can see where you're coming from. Who would have been your pick, Matt?
Well, I totally agree with Manny's points with regarding Ramsdale. Now, I'd love to see him be number one. Obviously with the connections with him, but I think it's too early. I think the games he has played for England is good for experience. It's good that he's part of the squad again. Experience the tournament, what it's like to go away with the camp. Pickford, I think, is the guy that Southgate will pick. And like Manny said, and rightly so, he's not really put a foot wrong for England. And he's always seems to play well for England, and he's never let Southgate down. So why would Southgate not play him? From the little that we see of him, because obviously Southgate watches him train, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
From what little we see of them, I would personally go with Nick Pope. Reason being, he's 30 years of age, so he's not as young as Rambo. He's actually older than Pickford. And I think, he's starting to mature. I mean, I don't know how many games you guys may have seen Newcastle play this season, but he's brought off some beautiful saves this season. Totally agree. His distribution's not as good as Pickford and Ramsdale. And Ramsdale, I would say, I'd agree with Manny again. His distribution's the best out of all three of them. But again, like Manny says, as a shot stopper, Nick Pope for me. So if I was England manager, I would probably be edging towards Nick Pope to start. But like I say, Southgate will go with Pickford.
What do you reckon, Sam?
So yeah, I agree with Matt. I would actually go for Nick Pope. If you look at Newcastle's recent form as well, I think they have conceded the least amount of goals this season, I believe. Don't count me right on that, but I think, and recently as well, I believe last week he was in a penalty shootout. He saved a couple of penalties as well for Newcastle to get him through to the next round.
Very true.
So on recent form, I would go with Nick Pope. Ramsdale is a very good goalkeeper as well, a very good shot stopper. But yeah, I'm glad he's in the team. But I think he would be the last choice at this point. But yeah, with Jordan Pickford, he hasn't put a place wrong for England as of yet. So that's why he's obviously Gareth Southgate's number one. But I think Pope may definitely feature during the tournament.
No, fair enough. Well, should we have a look at our defence then?
We will, and it could very well be, just briefly, that if England were able to secure qualification with a game to go, they could give either Pope or Ramsdale the third game to get some, playing time, especially if we secure top spot in the group. That certainly would be a possibility. Although I'm not too sure necessarily if Southgate is eager to rotate his squad that much, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, very good point, actually.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, because when you look at the games, we've got Iran first, and then I believe it's the US, isn't it?
Yes, the US.
Yeah. So if we win those two games, and I would say, well, US versus Wales could be a tight one. Could go either way. You'd say that probably the US are a little bit stronger than Wales, but you never know. But we could be through after that. But what you've also got to consider as well is who can, if we've secured top spot, that is probably the number one priority. I would imagine, looking at the group that we would be paired up with, which includes Senegal, Netherlands, Ecuador, and Qatar. I would imagine it would probably be Netherlands and Senegal that get through that group. If we finish second, it's very possible that we'll play the Netherlands. But then again, that's not given. That's not given. The Netherlands have also been a side which, have, and like I said on the preview with Hugo and Tom, they're a side that have shown a lot of promise, had quality, amazing players, and then done nothing. But then again, they've sometimes got to. They're a very strange one. Sometimes they've not qualified at all. Sometimes they've done terribly, and sometimes they got to the World Cup final.
Mm.
You never know
Yes.
what you're going to get with them. So I'd rather not risk it and try and avoid them.
Completely agree
Yeah,
there. Completely agree.
that's a good point. Good
Yeah.
point.
Well, let's have a look at these defenders then, and you rattle through them, Matt, and then we'll pick up on each one and try
Yeah.
and muster 4 at the back. I would say, wouldn't you?
See, with England, I'm personally a fan of 3 at the back.
Hmm.
And I like 3 at the back anyway. I like the formation of 3 at the back,
Yeah.
wing backs. But yeah, I mean, we can talk about whether we do a 3 at the back or a 4 at the back. But I
Hmm.
mean, if you look at the players that Gareth selected, Eric Dyer. I think he's from a couple of the games I've seen play this season. Looks like he's sort of starting to get back to his old form again because he's sort of dipped in form, I think, recently.
Yeah.
Last couple of seasons. Kyle Walker, good experienced head, great right back, and also I love him in the back three. The way he can play the ball out, the back three.
Believed to be out for the Iran game though.
Yes, he was meant to be out for the first 2 games, but he's on the grass now.
Okay.
So they reckon, he'll miss Iran, which will bring me on to an interesting point if we do play a back three against Iran
Hmm.
in a bit. Luke Shaw, for me, unlucky for Chilwell to be injured. But I'm a fan of Luke Shaw. A lot of people
Hmm.
aren't a fan of Luke Shaw, but I like him. I think he's a good experienced player now. I mean, he's grown up throughout the years. Obviously, he went to World Cup. Was it 2014? He went to the World Cup as a youngster.
I think so. Yeah.
Was it 2014? I think it was 2014. Then he missed the Russian World Cup, didn't he?
Hmm.
So now
Yes.
he's back in the fold again, and deservedly so.
And of course, he
John,
scored that goal in the final, didn't he?
yeah, yeah,
In the Euros, yes.
he
Yeah.
had a fantastic Euros. Sort of been in and out of the United team again since then, isn't he? But he's back in there now. So, and from the game I saw, I can't remember which game it was. One of the last games recently, I thought he played pretty well for United. So, John Stones, another one that's always going to be in there, and Harry Maguire, which I'm sure would be an interesting conversation about him. Trent Arnold. Um, I love Trent Arnold as an attacking player, but I do question him defensively. Ben White, fantastic season for Arsenal. I think obviously Manny, I'm sure will give us a lowdown on Ben White, but I think he's played really well for Arsenal this season, and obviously he's been playing right back for most of it. So, it gives England a bit more of depth and another potential person that can fill in at right back if needed. Trippier, well, for me, he is one of my favourite wing backs. To be fair, because he can play on the
Yeah.
left, he can play on the right. He's one of my favourites. Trippier, and he's had a good career in the game. Probably going to be his last tournament.
Hmm.
But yeah, fantastic player. And Connor Cody, another defender I like. I like Connor Cody. I think he's only obviously going to act as backup, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, good defender. So yeah, let's throw it out there then, Craig.
Right. So let's start with the most obvious one. Harry Maguire. Um, should he have been on the plane at all? Personally, I think he's had a very, very poor season for Man United so far. I think, he does bring that strength at the back. He is a strong player, but I just don't know. Personally, looking at those players there, I can't see, but I know Southgate will start him.
Yeah,
It's a question of loyalty more than anything else. I mean, just as he'll be loyal to Pickford, he will be loyal to Maguire and basically the other players like Stones and the others who have taken England so far in this tournament. In fact, if you take a look at the squad list, he's obviously gone for most of the same players who were there in the Euros, with a few exceptions. Obviously, there's no Jadon Sancho, there's no Dominic Calvert-Lewin, among others. As you mentioned, Matt, there's no Ben Chilwell either. So he will start with the usual pairing of Stones and Maguire. And if he wants to have a centre back, if Walker is set to miss the Iran game, I actually wouldn't mind seeing Connor Cody in there as one of those centre backs, because despite the fact that he doesn't really have that much in terms of caps, he's certainly been one of those players who has, responded well to tournament play. And certainly in the Euros, he was praised for the way he was willing to, sort of act like, I don't know how best to describe this, but he's a bit like what you would call in political circles a whip. You know what I mean? He's the one who sort of gets the boys into shape and sort of geese them up a little bit. And certainly his leadership qualities have shone even when he hasn't been playing. So he could potentially be rewarded for a good season with Everton, with a place in that starting lineup as one of those back three. That is, if Southgate decides to go with a back three. Otherwise, I would like to see him go with a back two, sort of a back four rather, with two centre backs, in which case Kieran Trippier and Luke Shaw would be the full backs. And another issue that I have is, of course, as you mentioned, Matt, Chilwell being injured has sort of weakened the squad in many ways as with regards to the left back position. Now, I know we've said that Kieran Trippier can certainly play as a left back, but there's always something about a right-footed player playing at left back that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, because with Trippier, whenever he plays right back, you see, he overlaps quite beautifully, and with his sweet right foot, he is entrusted with the responsibility of being England's set piece specialist. Just sort of have him as a left back, I'm not too sure if he's able to overlap as effectively as Luke Shaw would. And without that cover at left back, if anything were to happen to Luke Shaw, we could run the risk of potentially imbalancing our defence. And let's not forget, injuries will certainly play a big role in this tournament. Do we therefore play Bukayo Saka at left back? I hope and pray that won't happen. So, I mean, it's obviously going to depend on what Southgate decides. I think he will probably stick to his preferred back three. So I would go with Kieran Trippier and Luke Shaw as my full-backs, and Connor Cody should get into that back three lineup for me, along with Maguire and Stones.
Yeah, interesting.
What do you reckon, Sam?
Mike, Sam.
Obviously, Gareth Southgate does like a back three. So yeah, in this situation, obviously you would normally have Walker, but with him being out for Iran, obviously Stones, and he will play Maguire, even though I don't believe he should be the number one centre back for England. But the third choice, if we did a back three, for me, yeah, it will probably be Connor Cody with, and then you would have wing backs with Trippier and Shaw. But will he play Trent Alexander-Arnold? I'm not sure.
The thing is about Trent with the Iran game, and I don't know whether Manny will agree or you will agree, Sam, but do we think that Iran may put 10 men behind the ball?
Yeah, I reckon.
Do you think they're going to have a go for it?
I think they'll probably try and keep it tight.
Yeah.
I think they'll probably try and keep it tight. But then, towards the end of the game, if they are holding us, they probably will try and go for the juggler.
That's the thing, isn't it? But I mean, for me, if they're going to put 10 men behind the ball, I'd be inclined to play Trent on the right, because I think he, with his pace, I think he'd frighten them, and his attacking ability, he would really frighten them. Like I said before, I do question his defensive qualities at times. Now, I'd love to see Trent as a centre midfielder. I think he'd be fantastic as a centre midfielder, box-to-box midfielder, something like that. But as a right back, as part of a back four, For me, it would be Kyle Walker or Trippier all day. But I think for the Iran game, part of me fancies Trent to play that one.
Well, Ben White, because of
Now,
course White
yeah, with
he's done well.
with Ben White. Now with Kyle Walker being out for the first game, for me, my back three would be Maguire, and purely because he's got the experience of tournament football, and to be fair, similar to Pickford, hasn't really let England down majorly, has he?
No.
And again, Gareth's loyalty, I think he will play him. John Stones will be in there. And for me, I would probably play Ben White. And the reason why I'd play Ben White is because I think he could play out the back three, similar to the way Kyle Walker does. I think he's a good footballer, Ben White. So that's just my opinion. And my win backs would be Trippier and Shaw if we went with a back three. If we went with a back four, then it would be an easy one. It'd be Trippier, Stones, Maguire, and Luke Shaw.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Let's have a look at the midfield then. So go on.
Mr. Henderson, old experienced head now, isn't he? Probably a last tournament for him. But he was always going to be in there, isn't he? He's another one of Gareth's favourites. Bellingham, he's been playing well this season again, isn't he? And there's big moves to the Premier League, isn't there? Apparently City are heavily linked with him again, aren't they? Declan Rice, for me, I think he's a fantastic midfielder. I know there's quite a few debates about Declan Rice, but for me, I think the guy's quality. Mason Mount, yeah, definitely should have a place in the squad. I think he's quite creative. Calvin Phillips, there's a big debate going on about him. Should he be in the squad? Should he not be in the squad? I like Calvin Phillips as a defensive midfielder. I know he hasn't had a lot of game time. What's he made? Is it 3 substitute appearances this season? Something like that. He's not played a lot of football. He's definitely Gareth Gamble, isn't he? So I don't know. I like the player. I'm glad he's in the squad. It's just a shame he's lacking game time. And probably a surprise for me is Gallagher. But at the same time, I think he could be useful in certain types of games tactically. So it's nice to see him in the squad.
Right. So who wants to start? I'll probably start myself. And who wants to start? I'll start. I think there's one player that has to be in there, and has to start, and that is Declan Rice.
Yeah,
without a shadow of a doubt.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah,
agreed.
But who's going to be in that centre with him?
He likes,
I'd like to go ahead, Sam. Sorry about that.
He likes Mount, I think, as well. So I would like to go with Jude Bellingham myself.
Yeah, Jude Bellingham is. I don't think Henderson will play that often. Now, the problem I have with Jordan Henderson is he's a very good player, but he's not the attacking sort, is he? He's, somebody I know calls him sideways Henderson, because he would just pass it to the side, and doesn't really make as many moves forwards as he could do. Is that being a bit?
I don't know if I agree there. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what Manny thinks of Jordan Henderson, but I think Henderson can play that deep role. You're absolutely right, absolutely right. And you know, certain games for Liverpool though that I've seen, he has got a lot more forward when he's been allowed to. When he's got someone like a Fabinho in the midfield with him, he is able to get forward a little bit more. You are right about the sideways. You know, he does do a lot of sideways passing, but I think it's a little bit unfair to say he's just a sort of defensive-minded player. I don't know, but I agree with you. He'd be a bit part player. I think it'd be when legs are starting to go, he'll go on as a pair of fresh legs. And in certain games will be needed for his experience. So,
how old is Jordan Henderson now?
He's got to be about 33, isn't he? Is he 33?
34, I would say.
34.
So he's still 3 years younger than me. And to be honest, I was a bit knackered after 5 minutes really yesterday, but but yeah, especially and that's it, freezing cold park in Bournemouth rather than boiling hot Qatar. But what do you guys think? I would like to see Bellingham play in the centre. That man at the bottom, Phillips, rate him. I do rate him. But I would say Declan Rice, and I think he'll probably go for Mount.
He might.
Yeah.
Well, one thing which I certainly have is that given Calvin Phillips's lack of first team football this season, 3 substitute appearances, can you not hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So, yeah, given Phillips's lack of game time, I don't believe he should start at all because he has not been able to get to grips with Premiership football. I seriously doubt whether he will get to grips with training with the boys in Qatar. And I'm going to concur with Sam when I say that Bellingham should find a place in that midfield because I'll tell you what, I remember seeing him play in the Nations League and I thought, at the start, I don't think he was able to get into the game that much. But as the game would go on, he'd, get a little bit better and he'd certainly, sort of come into it a little bit more. And he could be one of those players who could potentially, go on to hold his own, certainly against Iran. And his experience of playing in the Bundesliga, which will certainly be quite important when it comes to playing against these guys, will certainly be an asset because he's not really in that typical English system you see. And these Iranians have a history of having played in the Bundesliga for more than a few seasons. So that could be something. And if I were to choose between Gallagher and Mount for the third position alongside Declan Rice and Bellingham, it would be Mount, of course, because Gallagher, for me, I mean, both of them playing at Chelsea, from what I've seen of them, Gallagher seems to be a little bit more inconsistent and doesn't seem to have the ability to really impose himself on the game too much. He can on occasions, but not too frequently. Whereas Mount seems to be willing to get involved more in the game. Yeah. And he should certainly be considered as an option. And of course, as we all agree, Henderson will be brought on at the very end when, legs are starting to tire because, I don't think he has the legs in him to start games anymore. But obviously, given that he is England's vice captain, he's been brought along for his leadership qualities. And he could certainly have a role to play within the squad, just like Connor Cody has. But again, it would be, if it's a 3-man midfield, it would be Rice in the middle and maybe Mount and Bellingham on either side of him.
Totally agree.
Shall we have a look at the next slide, which is going forwards? And to be honest, some of these, you could say, 1 or 2 of these could dip back into the midfield on the wings.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to that in a second. So go on, Matt, you far away.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got Mr. Sterling, who has not had the greatest start at Chelsea, has he?
No.
But again, another one that's been great for England, and a great servant for Gareth Southgate. And it's a man that he's always been able to depend on. So definitely had to be in the squad, really. Maddison, nice to see him in there, but I believe he's got a slight knee problem, so doesn't look like he's going to be involved on Monday. But it's nice to see that he's got into the squad. Mr. Kane has to be there. I know there's been certain talk of should he go because he's not scoring like he normally does, and which I think is just mad. He's
crazy, isn't it?
He's the captain. He's Gareth's voice on the pitch. So he goes. It's as natural as that. Rashford, bang on form, right at the right time. In-form Rashford is quality. And I'm glad he's come back into form at the right time because he is going to be very, very useful at this World Cup, I reckon. Mr. Grealish, interesting one. Had a really good Euros, didn't he? But I think he's sort of off the ball a bit with England. I don't think he's really set City alight since his transfer there. But a lot of the England fan base would be probably outraged if he wasn't in the squad. Mr. Saka, I love this player. He's really one of my favourites, and he's going to have a fantastic career with England. And like I think Manny touched on it earlier, I think he can play in various different positions anyway. And he's going to be very, very useful for England at this World Cup. And I do hope he gets some game time because he's a fantastic player. A guy that's familiar to us all, Mr. Callum Wilson. Who, to be fair, I think we spoke on cherry picking a little while ago, didn't we, about his chances of getting back into the England squad, and I thought there was absolutely no chance of it, but I'm glad he's in there. He's a good goal scorer. He is on form, which is a good thing. So he deserves his place in the squad. But I honestly didn't think I'd see it, to be fair. So I'm really happy for him. And, he's hit 30, so he's at that age now where for strikers, tournaments, don't come around quick enough. So it'd be great to see him get some minutes at the World Cup. It really would. And then Mr. Foden, absolute class act. Again, like Saka, another player I really, really like. Is creative, can play as a false nine, can play out wide. Fantastic little player. So attacking wise, I'm very happy with what we've got.
I am going to throw some controversy into this room now. And it stars that man, Jack Grealish. Personally, Southgate doesn't use him enough. I personally think he should start. And if you remember, and I might be wrong, but do correct me if I'm wrong. He set up both those goals in that Germany game in the Euros. He was brilliant. He turned that game on its head, where it looked like it was just rolling towards that 0-0, where it was going to be like, right, okay, Grealish come on, and it was like, bang. Am I right in thinking that? That was that game, wasn't it?
Yeah, you've got a good point there, Craig. But also, and I think Manny's itching to touch on this one. I just quickly want to say I thought he was fantastic as an impact player during the Euros. And that's something every manager, especially at tournaments, every manager needs that up their sleeve. Is someone that they know that will go on there and change the game. So I don't know whether I agree with you on that one. I think, he's got his place in the squad. I don't think his last few England performances have been great. But as an impact player, I think he could be very useful.
Where does the line stop, though, between impact player and regular starter? Because I think, personally, during that game, he flipped it on its head. Now, is it better to keep him on that bench until there's tired legs and he will do things like he did against Germany? Or do you think he could start a game, get us ahead, by a couple of goals? And that was and just going back to that Italy game, that was Southgate's problem, was we went 1-0 up too early. I was saying before that match even kicked off, I said it is dangerous to actually go 1-0 up within a couple of minutes. Lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. We went 1-0 up, and then for large portions of the game sat back. Whereas if you get Grealish on at the start, he hits them fast and hard. And I would say, actually, against somebody like Brazil, if we do end up playing Brazil or someone like that, he might be the perfect player to play against them.
Interesting.
Could be. And, both of you, I mean, obviously, Matt makes the point that Grealish was terrific as an impact sub in the Euros. And I remember, doing a Brian Moore whenever he would come on and say, "Come on, Jackie, run at them," like he would do for John Barnes in Mexico '86. So, yeah, certainly as an impact sub, he has looked really good. And I think it's also fair to say that in addition to his last few England performances not really being that good, his form with Manchester City has, I mean, don't get me wrong, he scored a few goals, but he hasn't really been able to get into the game too much. And it's difficult at Manchester City when, he's being rotated with more than a few other players to try and get a game, the likes of Mahrez and so forth. And does that really affect his confidence? I'm not too sure, but clearly he remembers his Euro days. And I think one of the main reasons why we lost that Euro final was because Southgate brought him on far too late in that game. He should have brought him on the second half and not just for extra time.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say, as all of you have said, that Grealish seems to accept his role as more of an impact sub. A little bit like how Theo Walcott was in Euro 2012 when he also wore the number 7 jersey. It's funny how that number 7 jersey, which is normally so blessed and iconic, has more often than not been worn by substitutes in major tournaments and otherwise. But I think Grealish would be more than happy to accept his role. The problem is, as you've mentioned, there are some of these players like Grealish and Sterling, and of course Saka and Maddison, who really would be suited as wingers in the 4-4-2. The only problem is, if he decides to start with Bellingham and Mason Mount, who can he bring on as a substitute? And he will obviously look to some of these forwards and see that if neither Bellingham nor Mount, in his opinion, can offer him that dynamism, if you will, then he will look to Saka. He might look to Maddison. I mean, obviously, maybe not Maddison because of his knee, as was mentioned, but certainly, Grealish could be considered. Sterling could be considered too. It's difficult to say because, again, Sterling and Grealish haven't exactly been in the best of form, and Saka has come back into a semblance of form. And of course, we all know about Maddison too. So that's going to sort of, really complicate things in some respects. But I certainly wouldn't mind bringing on Grealish as an impact sub. And I know that he thrives in that situation when the pressure is really on because he knows that he has that ability to change a game. I think maybe when you start him, that pressure might, increase a bit. And I think some players, Craig, seem to do better as impact subs than starters. So, I wouldn't mind bringing Grealish off the bench. No, I'm glad he's in the squad.
Here's another question as well. So, of course, Saka, fantastic player. I echo every word that you say there, Matt. He's been fantastic for Arsenal. He was fantastic at the Euros. Very unfortunate, of course, with the penalty miss, but um, personally, should he have really taken one? There's a lot of pressure on his shoulders at that
Yeah,
point.
I think on that point there, Craig, you make a very,
Mhm.
very good point. I know Saka got a lot of, um, abuse for the miss.
Yeah,
But do you think that some of the senior players should have stepped up and not let the
agree.
young lads take the penalties?
I
And
said it at the time. I said, personally, I think the senior lads should have stepped up and gone, right, okay, this is our time. Of course, fair play to Saka for having the confidence,
definitely,
but in a game with that higher stakes at the age that Saka is, um, it's it's a gamble. If he had scored the goal that won England the European Championships, he'd be forever a hero. That's the way how fine these lines are. You can just imagine it, Saka being lofted on everybody's shoulders at the end of the game. It'd been lovely to see, but I think at that point it was just so much pressure. I think he's learned from that. I think that experience, he'll probably, he's said when you watch him on interviews, he's a sensible lad, and what he'll have done is learned from that and thought, right, okay, that's happened, can't change it, but what am I going to do going forwards? My question now is Saka or Sterling, and I know
Saka.
which one I'd go with.
Saka.
Agree. What do you guys think?
on on form, I would say Saka. If I'm Gareth Southgate, I'm going Sterling. I think that's how it's going to work. I think it's going to be another loyalty thing. Um, I reckon with Sterling. Again, I hope he turns it on for us because when he's on form and form, Sterling is world class. So,
Mm,
but then again, if he does start and he's not doing the job, then we do have Saka on the bench who can come on and potentially change it. So,
agree.
um, yeah, yeah. I mean, when you look across all of those players, there's a lot of depth.
What do you think, Manny? Would you go Saka or Sterling?
It'll be a loyalty thing. I think he will go with Sterling because if we remember correctly, Saka didn't play the first two games of the Euros, but then he was brought in and ended up becoming a starter. I
Yeah,
think with regard to Saka as well, let's not forget that he will be targeted by the likes of Iran and maybe the USA with their, hustling, bustling midfielders who will look to snap at his ankles. And I think it's fair to say that if they target him and throw him off, he could probably, buckle under the pressure a bit. Whereas with Sterling, he's had tournament experience going back all the way to 2014 when he was named as a starter by Roy Hodgson in that disastrous campaign, albeit, but he had a good tournament. So I think it'll be with Sterling. The loyalty thing, and also he knows that he can trust Sterling to
mhm.
do well. And it's amazing because I think there's a similarity as well with certain players in the Welsh squad, and we will, of course, be closing out group action by playing against them. Several of those players don't seem to play very frequently for their clubs, but when they put on that Welsh jersey, they just transform into, superheroes in a way. Wayne Hennessy being one example.
Yeah,
So I think when it comes to tournament play, it'll be, it could be Pickford, it could be Sterling, it could be Maguire or Stones, it could be any other person, certainly Harry Kane. They'll always find a way to uplift their game whenever they play for England. But if Sterling can't quite cut the mustard, then Saka's a perfect replacement.
also there's one man on there that Matt was saying, is on form at this moment in time and seemed to um, get into the form of his life just before this tournament, and that is Marcus Rashford. And of course, Rashford on form is brilliant. Um, we haven't mentioned him so far, but what do you guys think?
Oh, awkward silence. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, I was actually trying to be courteous and wait for either
Yeah,
you
that's
or
what I
Sam
think
to.
we all think.
Yeah. So because, yeah, I absolutely adore Marcus Rashford. I know I shouldn't say that word specifically, but I've always rated him as a top player. And of course, I vividly remember how he came onto the scene in Euro 2016 with that heroic performance against Wales. And I think to myself, if only Roy Hodgson had brought him on much earlier against Iceland, we would not have been humiliated the way we were. And the fact that he has come back to form in the right time for this tournament is a full credit for that goes to Eric Ten Hag, who has pretty much given him his confidence and said, look, son, I have faith in you. I want you to be one of my main strikers this season, and you will definitely get more responsibility. But this could very well be your last chance here, and you need to focus on football and not politics. And I think he's responded well to that, and it's proved to be the magic charm that he needed. And now he's, of course, back in the squad on merit when a lot of people didn't think he would quite make it. And it's a credit to him. Now, whether he will start, I don't know. Again, if it's a question of having your two strikers up front, Southgate will have to choose, of course, between. Because Kane is going to start, so he will have to choose between someone like Wilson and Rashford to start. And I just think Rashford, with his experience, having worked under England, under Southgate, and having played for England longer than Wilson has, he will certainly get the nod. But he also is a more than decent impact sub, and he's like Grealish. He's another asset to have in the squad. So, I mean, for me, I would definitely start with Kane and Rashford as my two strikers, although Kane and Wilson would not be too bad at all.
And of course, we got Phil. We'll cover off the other four. Of course, Harry Kane is on there as well. You can only expect he would start, but Foden, Wilson, and Maddison. Do we think that Callum Wilson is going to get much game time? Because personally, I think he's there as a bit of a backup. We know what he can do. He's a great striker, and if he was to come on the pitch, for say, for example, Harry Kane, he can score goals if put in the right position. But do we think, because of his injury record, do you think that maybe he'll probably be a little bit down the pecking order in this England side?
It personally myself, I think it'd definitely be down the pecking order. I think there's only going to be one main striker on the pitch, and it's always going to be Harry Kane. He's the captain. Yeah. Even if we win the first two games, I couldn't see him putting Harry Kane on the bench to let Callum Wilson have a run out. At the end of the day, I do definitely reckon that he deserves a chance of playing some game time. But yeah, I think with Callum Wilson, it's just purely because Harry Kane's the captain, the main man. He is definitely not going to get much game time in my eyes.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. Maddison, do we reckon he's in the same boat?
So Maddison is currently, obviously, I think he got injured like a little knock in the last game. So I don't think he's even going to feature in Iran at this point. They're still 50-50 because I believe yesterday he was just with physios. He wasn't even on the training pitch. I think in time, if he gets back fit, I can't see why not. He will definitely be an impact player from the bench. I don't think he'll start, but he would definitely be a good impact.
And of course, Phil Foden, and player I rate, but in my mind, will he start? Will he? He's one of those. It could go either way.
For me, personally, myself, I would have a 4-3-3, and the three up front for me would be Saka, Foden, with Kane in the middle. I think Foden should definitely be out there for me. He is performing this season. His stats say it all for Man City as well. He's in form. I can't see why not. He won't be starting that first game.
Yeah.
I mean, I would personally go with Kane. Obviously, he's going to start. Foden, and for me, it'd be Rashford to start the first game. But I think you'll see a lot of Saka. Here's one
Hope
for you
so.
to throw it out there. England win the first 2 games. They're guaranteed to say go through as group winners. Do you rest Harry Kane and do you give Wilson a run out? Now, bearing in mind, Conte did say in one of his last press conferences that apparently Kane is exhausted. Now, obviously, we know the whole country club thing. You know, the managers want their players protected. Obviously, they've got a season to finish, and a very important season for Tottenham it's going to be. So, what do you reckon? I mean, is it a case of Iran with, say, luckily, hopefully, fingers crossed, say we're 2-3-0 up at half time? Do you take Kane off and give Wilson 45 minutes just to give Kane a bit of a breather? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Personally, if we're guaranteed the top spot, and we don't drop into second, you would expect Holland to probably win the group. But like I say, they are very much, they can get to the final. They can not even qualify. They can get knocked out early. They could go far. They're one of those that you really don't know what you're going to get from them. But say, for example, we've secured top spot. And can only imagine that it probably from that group be Senegal who we would be getting in the last 16, which is a winnable game. It's nothing to take lightly though. Although Sadio Mane is out, I would say yes, you would do against Wales, and the reason why and the argument for why Wilson over Maddison that game is, of course, Chris Metham. He knows him.
Interesting. Yeah.
He knows him.
Yeah.
Horses for courses, huh?
Yeah. And so, effectively, in that game, the Bournemouth connection could have quite a strong link, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could do. Could well do. Could well do.
We never thought we'd be saying that back in 2008, did we, Matt?
No, no, definitely not. Definitely not. But yeah, it's good to see. I mean, obviously, Callum's at Newcastle now, but it's good to see that, the 2 serious injuries he had when he was with us, and he's up there now. He's scoring goals. He's in this squad, and I think it's fantastic to see. I think he's a class act anyway, and it does make you wonder. It's one of those only ifs, isn't it? That if he didn't have those injuries, would he have been a bit more regular for England? Probably would have been.
Well, there is the England squad for the World Cup, and we probably got it completely wrong. Gareth will probably come up with something completely different, but we shall see. But of course, throughout the years, there's been quite a few Cherries players that have played for England. There's also been a lot of Cherries players that played for other countries as well, as you've seen in the intro video. But shall we go through some of those quickly and discuss some of the players that have played for both club and country? So look at that. That's pretty, isn't it? It's even got a logo. It's even got a logo down there. There we go. So let's start off with somebody we all recognise. Go on, Matt.
David James. Yeah, so 53 caps for England. Also represented England at B level with a cap, and 10 caps at under 21 level. Obviously came to Bournemouth at the very, very, very twilight end of his career, and made 19 appearances.
A very, very good goalkeeper throughout the years. Always, subject to a mistake in him. But he was quite reliable when called upon, and when he didn't do something silly. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. I mean, I never rated him in comparison to David Seaman, but obviously with Seaman's time running out, James was brought in to sort of fill the breach and certainly didn't do a bad job. The only problem is that, as we all agree, there was always a mistake in him wherever he went, even when he played for England. And, that sort of, I wouldn't say tarnishes it, but sort of, takes it down a little bit, a notch, if you will. But he certainly can look back on a fine career, and obviously playing for England in the World Cup when he was close to his to 40 is certainly not small potatoes by any means. So yeah, I'd say he was more than decent without being a great in that regard. In fact, I believe he was 39 when he played in that tournament. He celebrated his 40th birthday after England got knocked out. So yeah, he can look back on a more than decent career, and he's certainly been in the game for quite some time. And as I said, I wouldn't have him as an all-time great English goalkeeper like Banks or Shilton or Seaman, but yeah, more than decent, more than decent. You could count on him in some respects.
Let's have a look at the next player, and there's somebody that did have a very, very good career. Should he have played for England a bit more?
I think that obviously if there wasn't the likes of Rooney, I mean, God, however many other players was there, there was a lot of competition. When he first sort of broke into the England side, Owen was still around. So there was quite a lot of competition there. But yeah, one of my favourite footballers. I mean, I love this guy. Even when, I mean, the bottom corner picture there of him in an early Bournemouth shirt there. I mean, when he was on loan from West Ham, I just loved watching the guy, and followed his whole career all the way through. And if there wasn't so much talent in the England squad, I think he would have scored a lot more goals for England. I mean, if you just look at his stats, I mean, 57 caps and 20 goals is not a bad return, really. I mean, and he scored at pretty much every other level as well. I mean, under 21, he scored 7 goals. Didn't score goals actually for the under 18s or the under 16s, but he's got goals at decent levels and for England, and it does make you wonder, doesn't it, whether if he had a bit more, a few more caps, would he have got how many goals he would have ended up with? But I mean, over 2 spells at Bournemouth, 57 games and 22 goals. He's just one of my favourite all-time players.
Yeah, I've got to agree. He's very dependable in front of the goal, and personally would have liked to have seen him played a little bit more for England, but we were in those golden years, or what should have been the golden years, weren't we? What do you guys think, Manny, Sam?
Yeah, so obviously with Defoe, yeah, he definitely deserved a bit more game time. But like you said, the players at the time with Rooney and that, it was very hard for him to get in a bit more than he could. If he did feature more, would he have definitely got more goals? Of course he would. Like the second spell at Bournemouth, unfortunately, he didn't get that much game time, and at the end left us again. I'd have loved to have seen him more again at the second time, because even though he was at the end of his career, he would have still put in a shift. For example, the picture you put up there with him scoring in the air, that was Watford away, I believe, and I was sat in the Watford home end when I believe that was the equaliser as well. So
yeah, it was. Yeah,
many good times with Jermaine Defoe. Yeah,
Was it Palace or was it Burnley where he
Palace.
scored that goal?
Palace.
Yeah,
Palace. What a goal!
yeah.
I think did that win goal of the month for the Premier League?
Yes, it did.
I believe
Yeah.
it did.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which of the two it was, but I was thinking swaying towards Palace, but yeah, he did score against Burnley that same season, I think, as well. So that might be why I'm getting the two confused. But I think that was quite a good goal as well. I might be wrong there, so do correct me if I'm wrong. But that Palace goal was outstanding, absolutely outstanding. Should we have a look at player number 3?
Interesting one.
he is an interesting one. A lot of people would probably associate him more with that lot down the road, and of course Liverpool. But go on, Matt.
Well, he in fact he actually started out at Little Down Juniors
Yes.
when he was young.
Hmm.
Obviously, came on board with the Bournemouth School of Excellence, and I think Southampton paid a fee for him and took him to Southampton when he was a youngster.
Yeah.
And then when he was developing, they loaned him back, and he made was it 3 appearances for Bournemouth on a
Mhm.
little loan spell. Obviously, he's more famous for Saints and Liverpool. Obviously, a Premier League winner. But yeah, 34 caps for England, 3 goals, representing England at many other levels as well. But yeah, midfielder that
Mhm.
I always thought, again, he was around a lot of stiff competition for that midfield berth, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And you know, again, I think probably during, well, it wasn't so much well, I guess it was towards the end of Lampard Gerrard's time, wasn't it, as well, that he was trying to break into um the squads. I think it was always going to be difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Manny, what kind of player, for Lana, is he someone you rated as a player or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he went on to do a job at Liverpool and earn caps with England, so he certainly was a
Hmm.
useful player, I would say, and certainly an asset to have in the squad. I just think it's fair to say with him that he probably wouldn't have had that much in terms of really star quality to get him to start for England on a more regular basis, but he was able to do a job for England, and I certainly um, did rate him quite high. But I'm glad that he was able to leave Liverpool with some silverware and then move to Brighton, where he's obviously continued his career. And I don't think he's in the squad this time around with England, but he can certainly look back on having, done as well as he could and certainly made the most of the talent he had. And I think he'll be remembered as one of those players who, perhaps was probably unlucky not to have gotten more, but I guess with Jermaine Defoe, that would suit him just fine, perhaps.
Well, let's have a look at the next player, Dominic Solanke. Of course, not. Um, well, actually, there is one cap there, isn't there?
Yeah, he's made a senior cap. There's a picture of him there
Mm.
with Gareth. He come on for Vardy
Mm.
in 2017, I believe it was. Got his sole cap for England. But very prolific at all levels. If you
Yeah.
look down at the different caps he's got there, um, I think as a striker, he brings something different.
Hmm.
And as a footballer, he's a very, very talented footballer.
Yeah.
Will he ever get into the England squad again one day?
I think he might struggle to, but it would be good to see him do it. But I think he might struggle.
You never know, though. I mean, like from what I've seen of him this season, he has looked
Mm.
quite impressive. Unlucky to have been sidelined by injury for the most part, sort of reduces effectiveness. And being in competition with Jaden Anthony and Kiefer Moore isn't quite easy. But whenever he's played, he's certainly looked sharp and dynamic. So if he's able to play some more games and score a lot more goals, I think he could very well be another option. It's amazing how almost every year, every tournament cycle, England seems to have a knack of producing some more than decent strikers.
Yeah.
So he could still have an England career. Watch the space.
Well, let's have a look at the next player. And there's a man that we all recognise, of course, was in that Euro '96 side as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in Euro '96. Yeah, yeah, loved Anderton as a player even before he come to Bournemouth.
Yeah.
I was a fan of him, and when he did sign for Bournemouth, I mean, even though he didn't have the legs, still he still had the quality. And he obviously scored a World Cup goal.
Yep.
Against Colombia, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, another great servant of the game. 30 England caps, 7 goals. I mean, another player injury. All those injuries, would he have got more caps? Would he have featured more? We'll never know now. But it was a pleasure to watch him in a Bournemouth shirt, and pleasure to watch him in an England shirt.
Yep. Yeah, without a doubt. Such a talented player, and yeah. What did you make of him, Sam? Sam's on mute.
Hello, sorry.
Yeah.
You're right, mate.
Yeah, sorry, mate. Yeah. Do you want to start this bit again?
So, Darren Anderson, what did you make of him?
Darren Anderson, he was a great player. Obviously, the Euro '98 goal against Colombia, was it? Was one of the classic goals for him for England. But yeah, as Bournemouth as well, it was great to see him come to Bournemouth and play at the end of his career. Scored a few goals for us as well, a couple of important ones. Yeah, very all-round midfielder.
Yeah, definitely. And Mani?
Quality. And it's tragic that he never got more than 30 caps for England. But, it's another example of how, you can just never take anything for granted with regard to injuries. I was very fortunate to have seen that goal against Colombia on the telly. It was just a beautiful piece of skill and opportunism, which, of course, had to be eclipsed by that David Beckham free kick. But Anderson proved his value that day. And there was always a part of me, despite the fact that, of course, he made his name with Tottenham, I always rated people like him as players. And there was always a part of me that thought that maybe later on in his career, when he would play for the likes of Portsmouth and other clubs, that he would rediscover that form that would get him back into the upper echelons and really force his way back. But despite recovering some signs of his form, I think it was clear that England had moved on from him. And of course, the longer it went, it was clear that his best days were starting to disappear. I think it should be noted, though, that in his final game, his 599th career appearance, in fact, he actually began his career at Portsmouth, but then moved to Birmingham City after Spurs, and then, of course, ended his career with AFC Bournemouth. So he was still showing some quality, obviously, but as I said, his best days were behind him. I think if you all remember, I'm sure you all remember in his last match, it was against Chester City, I believe.
Oh, yes.
And that fairy tale Roy of the Rovers finish.
Yes.
A volley in the 88th minute coming on as a substitute. Stuff of dreams. Roy of the Rovers. You can never, ever, take that away from him. And I suppose the sense of timing, the fact that it was his 599th senior appearance, he retired one short of that magic 600. It sort of reminds you in a way that his career was sort of like a candle that burnt too brightly, but just went out a bit too quickly. But we have those memories, and that's enough, I guess.
Yep, definitely. Well, let's have a look at the next player. And yep, there's a recognisable face. Only the 3 caps for Danny Ings.
Yeah, 3 caps, but not a bad return with 1 goal. But yeah, 3 caps and 13 under 21 caps. Yeah, do you know what? I remember, Sam might remember as well, but seeing him come off the bench and starting to make an impact as a youngster, and him coming on and looking so energetic and chasing every ball down, literally defending from the front, starting with the attack, and you could tell then that it looked like he was going to go some way in the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, didn't really have the career that he probably wanted at Liverpool. But then again, look
Mm.
at the types of players he was competing with.
Yeah.
At one point there was a chance that he might have come back to Bournemouth. Which I would have welcomed because I think he's a
Agree.
good player.
Yep, definitely agree with that. And there's another one.
Yeah, Tyrone Mings. I was always fond of Tyrone. I thought he was a good player. Unlucky again not to get his chances at Bournemouth, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Competing with the likes of Steve Cook, who obviously was, part of the furniture of the back four, wasn't he? Competing with the likes of Nathan Ake. But I thought he was a great footballer. He still is a great footballer, obviously still playing, but I thought he was great when he was at Bournemouth. Again, unfortunately, he had that really nasty injury, didn't he, when he first started with us? He only went on to make 17 appearances for us, but I mean that's not bad for a defender, is it? Centre back, 17 caps and scoring 2 goals for your country. I mean that's great.
Very nice man as well. Very, very nice man as well to speak to. Very level-headed. Even though what some people make of Tyrone Mings and sometimes what is bounded about on the least favourite place, Twitter, Tyrone Mings is, an absolute gent who I've met on a number of occasions and always has been. Always has been. And we've got a couple more, I believe, haven't we, Matt?
Yeah, there's a question here. I don't know if you guys can spot, but can anyone else spot the other Bournemouth player there?
Ooh.
Well, it looks like an Argentinian to me. Could that be Senesi?
That's the one.
Yeah. Bloody hell.
Yeah, I knew Manny would get it.
Did not.
I didn't expect
Ask
you
you
to
to find that
it.
picture.
That's him competing at the World Cup. The World Cup that he actually lifted. He was the first England captain as Bobby Moore to lift a World Cup.
Do you know what? I didn't realise that Senesi was in that competition as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you say, of course, Lewis Cook has lifted the World Cup, but only made the one senior appearance, and I think a lot of that is down to injury.
Yeah.
All of it, I think, is, to be perfectly honest. I think Lewis Cook is such a talented player that, if he hadn't got that injury, about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, are we talking now, Matt? Just trying to think off the top of my head.
Yeah, roughly.
I think he would have got in there, but it's such a shame. He's so talented.
Yeah, and what an honour to lift a trophy for your country.
Do you think, and I'm going to throw this out to the whole room, do you think he could get back in the England squad, or do you think this is past him now?
I mean, similar to what Manny said with Dom, why not? Why not?
I'd love to see it. Absolutely love to see it.
Never say never.
Yep, that's the way to look at it, isn't it? Really, I would absolutely love to see Lewis Cook, get back in get into the senior England squad.
It's one thing as well, because I do remember watching that final when England beat Venezuela, and I was, of course, sitting there with my Union Jack cheering on the boys. It's a bit of a shame, really, that apart from the likes of Dominic Calvert-Lewin and maybe to some extent Ainsley Maitland-Niles, not too many of them, I mean, obviously Lewis Cook with Bournemouth, but not too many of them have been able to really kick on from that and really stake claims to, go on to higher things. I actually rated Woodman's performances in that tournament, Fred Woodman, the goalkeeper, and I actually thought that I think he was briefly on the books at Newcastle, and I would have loved him to have come over to Arsenal to sort of learn his trade and possibly become a future goalkeeper himself. But many of them haven't kicked on. But I agree with what Sam said. Why not? He's only 25. He still has some good years ahead of him, and you really can't say never. And there's always going to be a chance as well, because It's also the case with Mings, who's also quite young. In fact, had he not had a pretty poor season this season with Aston Villa, he could very well have been one of those defenders in the England squad. I mean, had he been informed, Ben White would have been nowhere in the picture, it has to be said. But, sometimes things don't happen the way you expect they would, and things turn out the best. But, you take a positive out of it and you work hard and try and get back into the picture next time around. But there is still time for Solanke. There is still time for Lewis Cook. Tyrone Mings as well should not even consider his England career over by any means. So there's always hope. Hope springs eternal.
Definitely. And there is another one, Jamie Redknapp.
Yeah, obviously played for us in his younger days. I think he played 13 times for Bournemouth, all in all. But another one that was competing with quality, and also did have quite a lot of injuries. Euro 96, I mean, Manny might remember this, Sam won't, but I think Venables played him at right back against Scotland, if I remember rightly.
Not too sure he would have played him at right back when he had Gary Neville in his team, but I will check that out for you right now.
Was it right wing back? Gary Neville made up the back three. I think it was something like that.
Yeah, so who did he play against, though? Because I remember England were in Group A, and I'm going to check that out right now.
I think it was Scotland.
It might have been...
I think he was brought on he might have been brought on as a substitute.
He was brought on as a substitute. He was brought on for...
On the right wing, I believe, I think.
He came on, ironically, for Stuart Pearce, and himself was substituted for Sol Campbell. So I'm sure he did play a bigger role in the tournament. I'm not too sure he was brought on as a... he probably might have been brought on in the defence. I wouldn't necessarily say what position specifically, but we can certainly look into that.
Yeah,
I think that was probably the only appearance he made, because I'm checking the knockout stages right now.
He got injured. He did get injured.
Yeah,
he did get injured during the tournament. But yeah, a player. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen his goal he scored for England at the Stadium of Light. Fantastic goal. Beautiful long ranger. But yeah, another one that probably, without injuries, would have got a lot more caps.
Indeed.
And of course, we've already spoken about this man, but
that man there,
he's already there.
he will be the number one in the future, definitely.
Definitely, and I think he's got such a good career ahead of him as well. So, let's have a look. I think we've only got a couple more to go, but of course, Jack Wilshere.
Yeah, another one again, class player. I mean, Manny will probably be able to touch on this one a lot more than us.
Oh yes. Sort of broke into the team at Arsenal with that performance against Barcelona when in his teens, and it was all going well. But again, injuries were just not kind to him. And I do remember his career really spanned the last few years of Arsene Wenger's time at Arsenal, when he obviously the team wasn't doing as well as they wanted to do. And the last few years, they were starting to fade away as a force in the Premier League, not able to finish in the top four. And Wilshere in particular, I would say, suffered a lot from being overplayed by Wenger in a way, because it's another reminder that when you have some young and talented players at your disposal, I know as a manager, you've got a temptation to play them every week and as often as possible, but really, the younger they are, the more they need to be rested in between games to be able to, recuperate and sort of gather their momentum. I just don't think Wilshere was afforded that luxury. And I'm sure you've all got good memories of him when he played when he played for Bournemouth. Certainly, whether it's in the Premier League or whatever. And he ended his career with a Danish club where he certainly gave it his all and didn't disgrace himself by any means. But I think he sort of came to the conclusion that with injuries having sort of affected his play, his best days were behind him. But he certainly did, light up the stage whenever he played. And 34 caps is really a poor reward for him. He did make a few tournament squads. I think at Euro 2016 and in Brazil 2014, he was in those squads, but never really was able to take the game by the scruff of the neck as much. But it's a question of what ifs. But now, of course, he is back at Arsenal as a development coach. So everything's sort of come back to centre in a way.
And there is Gary Cahill. Of course, had a very, very good career. Retired the other day as well, didn't he?
Yeah, retired the other day. Won everything in the game, didn't he? And 22 appearances he made for Bournemouth last year were, all vital appearances because his experience was second to none last season.
Yep, definitely.
I always wondered, given the role he played in ensuring that you got promoted back to the Premiership, why he was released. I mean, didn't the management see any kind of a role for him as such, or did they think that his legs had gone?
He was carried an injury towards the end of the season, I believe. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Manny. I would have kept him in the squad. I mean, I've said this to Craig and Sam before. I would have kept him for this season, for experience. Even if he was just on the bench and in and around the squad, just for his experience, I think would have been great for this season. But obviously, Mr. Parker felt different. All the club.
I would have, because he obviously he played starting lineup most of the first half of the season, but then just didn't feature at all. The second half, I was gutted. He didn't feature the second half, and I definitely reckon he should have carried on playing at the centre back. And I, like Matt said, I would have definitely had him for a season as for experience in the Premier League.
Right, let's have a look at the next one. Callum Wilson. We've spoken about him in quite some detail.
Yeah.
Of course, got 4 England caps, but hopefully should add to it in Qatar. Of course, Rio Ferdinand was on loan at the club. Everybody knows about Rio Ferdinand, don't they?
Yeah.
His name is Rio, and he glides along the field. A little Duran there for you lot.
I do like that. I tell you what, we need to make turn that into something. But
and next week's episode, Manny sings.
Manny
no!
Stars in their eyes.
I had to open my mouth.
I don't know. We was talking about this the other day from the infamous Felaraki 2004 holiday, and my rendition of Seal, "Kiss from a Rose," in the middle of the bar. I was a little bit intoxicated at the time. I wouldn't do it again because I'm surprised I didn't clear out the bar. It was probably because they were as drunk as I was, but. But no, you're a lot better than me, Manny. But yeah, around that time, of course, Rio Ferdinand was playing, and outstanding player. So, shall we have a look?
It was a good move for him, obviously, to go to Bournemouth that early and experience some game time at another club. I mean, I'm not too sure you remember his days as a Cherry, but did he impress you when he was there?
Yeah. I do remember. I don't know if you can remember, Sam. I mean, you must have only been about 7 at the time, but I remember that in the Echo at the time, them raving about him. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever read one of his books, but he details in one of his books about his career that our manager at the time, Mel Machin, didn't call him Rio or Ferdinand or anything like that. He just addressed him as class. Because he was even at that young age, the guy could play football.
I did read My Story, and I do vaguely remember that. I also remember one of his earlier coaches telling him that he was going to call him Pele.
That's right. Yeah. You must have read the same book. Yeah.
Well, let's rattle through these ones quickly because these
are just the guys that are at the World Cup, aren't they?
Kiefer Moore.
Kiefer's there. Obviously, Mr. Mepham.
Yep.
He'll be there. We'll get to see Nathan.
Yeah.
Netherlands, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And Cameron Carter Vickers.
Yeah.
I enjoyed his spell at the club. I thought he was a good defender. And of course, another lone player we had, Harry Wilson.
Yeah.
Be with the Welsh squad.
When I did speak to both Hugo and Tom yesterday, I'm confused why Arnaut Danjuma hasn't got in the Dutch side, but
Yeah, I did read something about this, that apparently his form's dipped. Is that right?
Yeah, his format's dipped.
but you know, after what he did last year, you would have expected it. But I guess we'll have to find out what happens on Monday. World Cup starts with Qatar versus Ecuador. Always that's a very interesting opening match. It's normally somebody like the current World Cup holders or the hosts opening it. Of course, Qatar are the hosts, but you know, Qatar versus the Netherlands, you could say, well, that might be a bit more of an attractive game to a lot of people. But, you know, I'm sure. And thank you to everybody from Ecuador as well who has ventured on to our channel, and quite a few subscribers as well. So thank you. Hopefully we'll have some Ecuadorian cherries.
Interesting.
Well, I'm not sure how they would taste, but that should be interesting.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. But please, everybody, like, subscribe, hit the bell, do your stuff, share the video. We are on all major platforms. So we're on Twitter, UTC, IAD, AFCB. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. So please do get involved. The Facebook group, you can comment and speak about football in there as well. So please do get involved. But until the next one, thank you, Matt, for joining me as always.
Thanks, Greg. Let's hope England get a win, and we'll have a good review on next week's show.
Definitely. Thank you again, Sam.
Pleasure as always.
And thank you, Manny. It is a pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen.
And I'm sure you'll be back next week, won't you?
Same time, you know where I'll be.
Excellent.
No complaints.
Good stuff. And thank you, everybody, for watching this video. Please, like I say, do hit the subscribe and share it around. And we will get back to cherry picking once the season resumes, but we will have another World Cup cherries next week. So we'll see you in that one. Thank you for joining us.